We're starting tonight, of course, due to Executive Order 2020-07, due to COVID-19, McHenry County Conservation District has determined that it is not practical or prudent to hold a public meeting of Board of Trustees for November 19th, 2020 in person due to the current pandemic. So we are meeting remotely. So that's with that statement, everyone knows what we're doing, and we're all available for the Open Meetings Act. With that being said, we are ready to call the meeting to order, and I guess we're starting with a pledge. Do we have a flag?
We do, and Jen, according to council, because of the remote, 100% remote, he had requested that we read this note that you have here, that we read that through its entirety. Okay.
Pursuant to Section 7E of the Open Meetings Act, I, as president of the McHenry County Conservation District, has determined that its in-person meeting is not practical or prudent at this time because of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and Governor Pritzker's related disaster declaration. I have further determined that the physical presence of an employee or member of the public body at the regular meeting location is not feasible due to the disaster described in the governor's declaration. I recall you telling me that now. I'm sorry, but I didn't urge. So, okay, now we're ready for the pledge. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we're ready for our first roll call. Who is doing roll call?
I am.
Megan? Okay, very good.
Yep. Trustee Cook?
Yes.
Trustee Dom?
Here.
Trustee Thomas?
Here.
Trustee Brandt?
Here.
Trustee Fritz?
Here.
Trustee Campbell?
Here.
And Trustee Henning?
Here. Okay, that brings us to public comments. Do we have any public out there? Who's monitoring that tonight?
There's nothing. Sorry, nothing. I couldn't get the mute button.
Okay, thank you. All right, that moves us right along to new business. Is Andy here?
I am.
Okay, welcome, Andy. Thank you. Are you leading off to begin with here, I believe?
I'm not quite ready.
Oh, okay.
Maybe 3 minutes just to get this opened up.
3 minutes.
So if President Henning, if I can, and just to kind of what we're hoping to achieve tonight during the committee of the whole, since we have 2 meetings this evening, we've got 3 items for really the cow to talk about: our preliminary tentative budget, which Andy is teeing up, and we'll go through that together and then be able to answer any questions you have. This is a preview. All of the material is yet to be put in the packet that you will be getting for the January meeting, but we have worked to get you the schedules, and then it'll have a lot more narrative of goals and objectives and things like that as we finish on fine tuning and pulling it all together. So tonight, you know, if there's things that you see, we're hopeful. We're basically, as you'll see with the numbers, exactly where we shared that we intended to go from the board's discussion back in August and September when we passed an ordinance on the levy. The other 2 topics for tonight is the outreach to our newly elected officials, and then the scheduling of the board development with the Illinois Association of Park Districts. So those are the 3 topics. We've got 2 hours. If we're done early, we can take a break and then come back for the regular meeting at 7. So we'll just see what time, and President Henning, it's up to you how how much time you want to spend on each of the different issues.
Okay, and I don't want anyone to feel rushed out of tonight. I did talk to Bill today, and if we feel that we need a finance committee meeting somewhere in the next 8 weeks or something, we could schedule one. So I don't want anybody to hesitate to speak up or have any discussion tonight due to the time constraint, because we can we can convene another meeting. I believe last year we had 2-3 finance committee meetings, so we could definitely make this up somewhere else. I want everybody's input so that we, when we get to the end result, we're all on board with that. And so anyway, or best we can anyway. So that being said, is Andy, are you ready yet?
I'm ready. I just need to be able to share my screen.
Okay.
And I would agree. too,
Try it now. Try it now, Andy.
Can you see that?
Yep.
Sure
Yes.
can.
Be good to go. Hold on. So John, just to reinforce what you said, there's a lot of information. As always, I spend most of my time focusing on the general fund. You know, that's the one that obviously has the big operational levy that drives everything. So as we get done, or even if it gets to be where it's, you know, we need to just cut it off, we can come back at a future time and finish the other funds if we need to.
Right.
With that said, the district has these basic 6 funds. The ones in green are the ones that receive the tax levies. The general and insurance make up the PTELL, and the debt service obviously has its own levy. I put the dedicated and camp capital funds in dark blue because I'm going to spend a little more time talking about them than the others. So it'll be the general fund, the dedicated, and the camp. And then we'll see where we are after that if we want to keep going.
Okay, good.
With that said, jumping into the general fund. So we've had 2 basic budget operating guidelines, and that is that we had a balanced operating budget where the operating revenues covered the operating expenses with the exception of capital. And then we maintain a minimum fund balance of 25% of the annual operating expenses. So of these 2, we are maintaining that 25 operating expense annual reserve, obviously, with over $6 million in reserves that we're projecting for end of 22, and that would only be 2.3 million. So we're there, but we don't have a balanced operating budget, and we knew that. And as I said in the board summary, when we came to you in July and presented some of the basic budget tenets and looking for guidance, we presented 3 different levy scenarios. So we're looking at the 20 levy as well as obviously what's going to drive the 22 budget. So this shows the same summary of all the detail forecasts that I gave you of scenario 3, which included only increasing the levy for the amount of new development, about $40,000, and not taking the CPI. And if you remember, we did a pretty good job of projecting. Let me see if I can get my pointer on here. Oops, wrong guy. Projecting all the revenues, you know, those are pretty foreseeable with the exception of the farm lease can change. And we also in July drove all the expenses for personnel, and then we just kept the other operating flat and drove those forward and didn't change them. But obviously, you know, we're accounting for 77% of the expenses there with the personnel. So then as we look at, if I can get this to come down. Oh, that's not good. That's what I get for using that laser. Locked me up. Let's see if I can back up here. So that's what we showed you in July. This is a summary of the actual 22 budget then, as we're presenting it, the tentative 22. You can see the revenues haven't changed a lot, a total of 0.8% different than we showed you in July. We'll talk about those in a little more detail. If you look at the personnel, very close to what we showed you in July. And again, we'll get into some of the detail between fiscal year 21 and 22. In July, we showed a net operating deficit of $346,000. We also had a placeholder of capital up here of 93, but I took it out for comparison. And you can see now we're showing you the tentative budget. It's very, very close to the net operating deficit of $338,000. So actually a little better than we're showing in July. Looking at the budgeted revenues for the general fund, we see this graph several times a year. It doesn't change very much. 94% of the district's general fund tax revenues are coming from property taxes, making up the 82%. and the farm lease is driving the other 12%. And then you can see, the little bits of program user fees, 1.6, and the other small amounts that make up that 3%. Again, that hasn't changed much over time under the restrictions of the Illinois Conservation District Act. There's just not a lot of opportunity for the district to generate other alternative revenues, although we've been trying very hard, as you know, for the last at least 7 or 8 years. And you can see over time, this blue bar shows this is the property tax percent, stays right around 82%. And then this yellow big bars, the property rents, largely farm leases, collectively then they make up 85%, or I'm sorry, 95% of the total revenue going back for at least over the last decade. Looking at how we calculate that PTELL levy calculation, which we really didn't go into last September when we did the levy, but under PTELL, you're allowed to start with the total levy for all 3 PTELL levies combined together. It makes up your aggregate total. So we're allowed to start with that 19 levy of $7.8 million. And then you can grow it by the rate of inflation from 2019, which is 2.3%. It would give us an additional $181,000. Then you're allowed to add a little bit of new development for that. We estimate to be about $40,127. And that would be the total PTELL levy then of $8,096,000. It was a 2.8% increase. And that's the actual levy that the district issued. I think it was scenario 1 that we put in front of the board in July. So what we've incorporated now into this tentative budget, based on that discussion that we had, is we're only increasing the levy by the new development. We're not taking the inflation. That's the assumption here. So this levy's already been issued. So what it would mean is that we would need to abate sometime between now and February, $181,000 to get it back to that net 7.9 million. And again, this is what's driving this budget in front of you, is this assumption. And just as a reminder, under the PTELL, we could have gone back to the higher 2018 levy, which was 7.9 million. So it starts out about 120,000 more, grew it by inflation and new development. We would add $8.2 million. So again, if you look at what was available, this 8.2 versus what we're actually going to take, that's still 7.9. That's $304,000 would be given up. Again, I don't want to. I know there's a new trustee here, and it's important to look at where we've been. So this shows all the levies from 2011 general fund levy through 2020. The green bars represent the 3 years the districts raised the levy under PTELL, capturing everything that was available. The red shows years that we were either neutral or had a very almost insignificant increase. So really, since 2011 through 20, we've only had effectively 2 increases. We did take one in 18, but as we know, we agreed to reduce that back down with a reduced 19 levy. So effectively, it's just been these 2 years out of the last 9 that we've been able to capture the full PTELL levy. And that averaged then over that time period, just 0.4% as an annual increase. And then I've updated this schedule, which shows what the district actually collected for the total PTELL, not just the general fund, but general fund, Social Security, and insurance fund. Again, most of that is general fund, but in the green, it shows what the total PTELL levy was from 2011 through 20. Collectively, it was $69.6 million. And then had we taken what was allowed under PTELL, that amount would have been $76.1 million. The total difference is $6,495,000 over that time period. The one thing I did different this time, I hadn't done before in the past, we've always just looked at what we would have collected if we increased the levy just by the inflationary factor. And now I've gone back and captured both the inflationary and the new development. So that's why you see this number grow quite a bit. The other really telling thing is that in 1 year alone, just in this 2000 levy, we would have additional levy capacity under PTELL of $1.3 million. And so we forfeited over the time, and it's an average increase of just 0.5% over that time period. Again, I showed this chart in July, but I wanted to put it up here again because it really speaks to how conservative the district's been. It shows the general fund property tax levy percentage growth of increase from 2005. So this 6 is the first growth from 05. and how it's grown each year. So if you go to say 2013, it's grown in total just 20% from that starting of 05. And all the way through 19, it's only grown 26%, or again, 0.4 of an annual percent. I didn't take this to 20 because I don't have the county's information. But as a comparative, as you look what the county's been able to do with their general fund levy, it's grown almost 5% to 6% on average through 2016. And as we know, they started to have some levy reductions. They've been able to offset these largely with levy. They've been able to offset some of these increases with reductions from levies through other funds. But again, a really telling graph right there. The district's been, as conservative as we could be as far as fiscal management. Looking at the alternative non-tax revenues then within the general fund, the biggest one is the farm leases. So we're showing a decrease of $55,000 from fiscal year 21. In the July presentation, we had that going down to $105,000. So in July, we had built the farm lease income, assuming $370 for corn. And now we're showing it at $390. If you look recently, December's futures, they're over $4 now. So I think that $390, if it holds, should be pretty good. For every 10 cents a bushel of corn goes up, that December's futures, that represents another $25,000 to the district in revenue. So we could probably tweak this up again, closer to $4. We'll see how it plays out, and add another $25,000 of revenue to the general fund. And then just to show you, well, there's been a lot of fluctuation in the price of corn over the years. For when you get to the December's future average during February, it's been very stable. It's sat right around $4, and that's where it's about where it's sitting today. So again, our budget for 22, we're showing $390. We may push that up a little bit. Looking at the interest income, this blue line is the federal funds. Obviously, it's driving the investment rate of return for the district. You can see, we were doing quite well in 2020. We're heavily invested. We have about 80% of available reserves invested at all times, which is really strong. But as these yields start to plummet, now they're down, the Fed funds is down basically to 0 is the target rate, 0 to a quarter basis point. So we're going to lose about $68,000 from 21 through fiscal year in 22. What's saving us right now is we still have $5.5 million of investments, with an average yield of over 2%. But again, over the next 18 months, those are going to largely disappear. As you get out to 23 and 24, you'll be seeing, this interest revenue come down to these levels unless this Fed funds turns around and the economy gets a lot stronger. Looking at the programs and user fees, we've been doing a really good job at focusing the growth of this. The blue line represents the budget. We can see from 15 to 2021, we've grown at over 70%, and actually exceeding the budget in the last full year. The orange bar is the actual of $170,000. In 21, obviously, we're shut off this year due to the COVID. So we're, as we knew, we're way under budget. In 22, we think most of that's going to come back. We're showing a decrease in total of about $20,000, and that's largely education programs. But again, the education department's being very creative, doing a lot of remote things now, and we think a lot of the in-person hopefully will come back during the season. Jumping to the personnel side of things, we're showing total wages going up 3.1%. And I'll talk about the detail of how we got there. On the retirement side, we're showing it going up 2.8%. Again, that's driven by the wage increase, obviously. Also, I think we talked about previously, the IMRF required contribution is going down slightly from just over 12% to just under 12%. And then lastly, the insurance is going up by 9.1% under IPBC. We had a net premium increase of 8.9%, but that is annualized, so it's fixed for 18 months. So when you annualize that down, it represents about 5.9% as a rate. So we still have to absorb this year, but as you get 12 months out, where normally we'd have another 3 or 4% increase, for us it would have been more than that. That won't happen again because that rate's fixed for another 6 months. Also embedded in here, we have 4 additional employees on the plan that weren't on the plan in 21. That cost by itself is about $50,000, which would represent a 5% increase. So if you back that out, you'd really be looking at a 4.5% increase for the year, which is actually very strong in our IPBC. And then I think we shared with you too, we got Blue Cross Blue Shield renewal rates in, and they came in at 17%. So we really got lucky when we picked this year to actually move. We've been doing the plan for 3 years to get in our IPBC, but the fact that everything lined up and we got there, it saved us having to try and mitigate a 17% health insurance increase. So it worked out well. In total, we saw personnel costs going up 3.8%. They made up 77.1% of the total cost for the 21 budget. And that goes up a little bit now to 78.1%. As we look at the wages, how do we, we're showing a 2% increase for non-contractual, non-bargaining, but we're showing total wages going up 3.1%. So we want to talk about how do we get from that 2% increase to a 3% cost difference between budget 21 and 22. So that 2% is effective for all the non-contractual, non-bargaining. That does include the 150 because their contract aligns them with the same wages and grade system as non-bargaining employees get. We're also increasing the salary grades 2% as we suggested in July. The 4.7 is going to increase the annual cost of the district of about $17,000 in fiscal 22. So it represents about 30 basis points, or 1/3 of 1% cost increase. We have included taking what was the agricultural services coordinator part-time position. That's going away. We're bringing in the full-time agricultural ecologist. That was also included in July. It represents by itself about 1/2 of 1% of a cost increase. Is there anything else we want to talk about on that one, Elizabeth?
Well, yes. So tonight on the regular agenda, we have an item for action on the consent agenda to move forward with the position description and the grading. And so then we can incorporate it in the budget and get the confirmation. So that goes forward. So that's important to have a discussion where the board is on that. And we're hopeful that you agree. The other thing related to personnel that's on the agenda this evening is the restructuring of our police department. And Andy, if I'm jumping ahead, please let me know here.
Oh, you're fine.
We are looking to go down to 2 sergeants from 3. And that would be effective as of, I believe that's December 1st. And then to do a wage adjustment, and then to move to hire the 8th officer. And that would be effective April 1st with the approval of the 2022 budget. So those are the 2 personnel. The other items on the agenda this evening under the regular meeting, there are no associated wage increases with those. It's just a cleanup on the position, on the job descriptions. And so if the board wants to discuss that, I don't know if, while Andy goes through the personnel, if we want to go through that, if there's any discussion on those items, President Henning, we could have that during this meeting versus, in advance of the consent. However, if you guys want to discuss that, or if you want to go through the presentation, whatever you.
I think we're at it right now. So if there's anybody that wants to discuss any of these positions, now would be the time. Let's back up to the ag coordinator. Is anybody that wants to discuss that? I'm not hearing anyone.
Okay, wait, I had to unmute myself. I just want to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Were these positions talked about previously, or is this all new?
These were talked about earlier this summer. We brought forth, we've been talking about the retirement of our part-time agricultural coordinator for quite some time.
Okay.
And the police department, we did talk about that as part of collective bargaining and discussions that were, so this is all information that was known. I think the only 2 that is just a job cleanup that you're hearing tonight on the agenda, which is something that we regularly do when a position is and that's the IT specialist to remove the administrative coordinator component off of that. And then with the leaving and departure of our community relations specialist, before we put the position back out on the street. We always go into a position, we look at it, make a determination. Do we need to move forward to fill it? Are there any changes to the job description before we post it? And so that's just housekeeping, and that's what's in front of you today.
Yeah, I think I remember the ag coordinator going to the ecologist. Is that correct? It's
Yes.
the same person just moving over from a part-time to a full-time with a different title, correct?
A different emphasis. The positions has a different emphasis. I mean, it's a little bit more, we're looking for someone, so it's graded differently than what the position was. There's been a lot of, we shared the agricultural GIS mapping and.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. I do remember that. I guess it's the other one, but that's okay. We can just move forward then.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because after our discussions last year, I wanted to make sure that all of our personnel that we were offering was included at the same time of the budget, and you have all of the information.
Exactly. Okay, great. Thanks.
Are you confident, Elizabeth, that this new agriculture position will warrant full-time, then that there's more than enough work there for full-time?
I am. I think there's much with the studying, even the work that they're doing right now. If we're going to pull the science and mapping, you know, I trust our team. We're already down to what needs to happen. And so maybe Ed could speak to that. He's on when we're off season, okay, fields in the wintertime. Can you talk a little bit about what you envision this position and how that's preparing and how it's advancing?
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about it. And I asked Brad Woodson to come in tonight. Brad works very closely with the agricultural program, so I'm going to offer him an opportunity to talk to when I'm finished. But this position is warranted full-time for more than a couple of years. It has changed dramatically since the part-time position that was created in 2013. There is work full-time. Right now, what happens from December into about almost the beginning of April is anything agricultural related, and there's quite a few things that come up, falls to the existing staff to try to parse out and take care of. That job is very, very different than it was when Glenn took it as a part-time person. At that point, it was really a position where you renegotiated leases or you put them out to bid. It's become a lot more since then. And I'm going to ask Brad to maybe talk some about how that's changed.
Yeah, the big thing is actually we started collecting our own data. So what we're trying to do in June is go out in the field, look at these farm fields, and it's kind of a compliance check, but it's also, we're doing penetrometer or compaction measurements. We're actually doing worm tests. We're measuring the grass waterways, the field borders, the filter strips. And what we're lacking now is an opportunity to talk with the farmer. So Glenn usually, well, he doesn't have enough hours to carry through the winter. And so that is the ideal time. I think, John, you actually mentioned it. We need to sit down with the farmers when they have time to sit down, and that's that winter period. So what we're hoping to do is schedule these meetings, talk about the data we're collecting, talk about, you know, the data the farmer's collecting, and then we're actually taking our own soil tests too. We're having a soil scientist take them. So we bring that information in too. So there's a lot to talk about. We're just lacking in doing that. And then really we're trying again to shift from conventional ag to this more sustainable and regenerative, and trying to implement practices. There's all sorts of cover crop opportunities available, no-till in the fall, or really talk about tillage and see if we have allowed it in certain cases, but we're trying to eliminate fall tillage. So, and those are the kind of meetings we have to have. So we don't come off as dictatorial, but we want to come off as working with the farmer.
And I would add one other thing. At one point, the Conservation District, when it wound up with farmland as part of a purchase, farmed it for a couple of years and then converted it into habitat. And Andy just got done doing the budget presentation, or he's in the middle of it right now, and it pointed out how critical the agricultural income is to the district's well-being, especially over probably the next half decade. Increasingly, we've started to look at our agricultural land as a long-term process for the district, and we've elevated it from simply farmland that we rent out to farmland that is an integral part of how we manage our natural resources. You'll even see that in the presentation tonight, the Natural Heritage Report. We look at our farm fields and the conservation practices on them, and we count them as habitat because they truly are. But you can't have that kind of intricacies in the farm program when you have a part-time person there. It takes a good partnership. It takes a partnership that you can keep going and a partnership that is back and forth between the operator and the district staff. And frankly, to be really honest with you, we don't have the full-time staff capacity right now to handle what happens in the farm program over the 3 to 6 months that Glenn isn't there. We're really scrambling to try to make it up. It has become a full-time position, and it brings in over $1 million in income. So it really needs to have that level of attention to it.
Okay, thank you. Anyone have any questions?
I got a question about the farm program.
Sure.
Okay,
Okay, all these cover crops and no-till and all this other stuff. Obviously, there's cost to it for the farmer. Plus, sometimes the yield is less. No-till versus some of this level ground that you till. So do you foresee that you might have some resistance with some of these practices you want done going forward?
I'm going to weigh in and I'll let Brad weigh in.
Okay.
I think change is always hard. And what we tried to do with the farm program, as Brad said, is not bring everything into the program at once and to maintain a flexible approach to things. Our no-till is right now focused on land that's highly erodible, as opposed to land that isn't highly erodible. And what I will say about the farm operators we have, that when you develop a good working relationship with that operator, you find most operators are interested in the most productivity they can get, and they're interested in taking care of that land. So I think we've met a little bit of resistance, but I think we've also met a lot of operators who understand the reasons and understand why it's important to do it. And Brad, you might want to talk about some of the experiences you've had.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. And then you make a good point, because that's why we've kind of moved into this slow. But just for instance, there was a cost share program with cover crops this year. It's actually a 3-year program. And so the local soil and water conservation district put it out. And basically it's a 75% cost share. And it's really an incentive to help farmers get started in it. So we, of course, we sent out emails to all of our farmers, encouraging them to do that. And then again, when you look at it's not just the yield, it's also the savings, the nutrients that the cover crops provide. So that's where it's sitting down. And I know farmers probably do their own research, but we have actually, just as much access to research. So we can hopefully help split that divide and encourage our farmers to do that. And the tillage is a big one. I mean, and it's amazing when you read all of farm magazines, tillage is such a bad thing according to the research, but then farmers are doing it because they do have that yield advantage. So in drying the soil and getting in the field earlier. So those are the kind of things that we have to figure out how we get through that. And the only way we're going to do that is, I think, to be successful at it is sitting down and talking to the farmers. So I think what you're getting at though is, if we put this in place, then we're going to see less rental rates. That's going to occur. But what we've done whenever we put a farm out for bid, we've seen increased prices, increased rents. So we hope we're on the right track, but that's why we want to meet with the farmers and talk with the farmers. So I hope that answers your question. I think
Sure.
that's what.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks, guys. Anyone else? Okay, is there any questions on the staffing of the conservation police force? Anyone there?
I have a question, Pat.
Okay, go ahead, Pat.
So how many full-time people are there on the police force right now? There's the sergeant, there's the Laura, and how many people total?
I think there's 12. It's 7 officers and 2 sergeants and 3 sergeants, but they want to go to 8 and 2. That's 10. And then the chief and the full-time administrative assistant is 12.
Okay, so I guess back when we bought the cars so that they could take them home, I thought that was supposed to make us more efficient. So we wouldn't need maybe an extra patrol officer, that it would save, be more efficient. Plus we got this app well, not, I mean, that's for hunting, but, so that's why I thought we did bought the, you know, the cars and they could take them home. Is that,
Or is online, and Pat, you are absolutely, we did gain efficiencies with doing that and allowing them to go immediately from home to a job site. But we're also, so the head count is not going up. It's just a shift to, our sergeants have served in a capacity of being patrolling officers, just as versus all the administrative work that goes on to it. And so when we're down, moving from 3, we're 1 person short. So instead of hiring another sergeant, we're looking at hiring a patrol officer that can still do the rounds and do that. It's just, it's a shifting and then splitting the administrative duties to the 2. And then that prepares them better for succession planning going forward, which is one of the goals. Chief King, do you want to talk a little bit about, you wrote a great report and
Very
highlight
thorough.
that you've been observing your.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. And thank you for the opportunity to let me speak on this. If you remember, we did actually go down a staff member. When I started here, it was 12 officers or 11 officers plus the chief for a total of 12. We are currently at 9 plus the chief, which is 10, because one of our positions is vacant. And that vacancy occurred with the retirement of Sergeant Ty Culver. So this proposal, if you look at the report that I prepared, you're going to see how tremendously our call volume has been going up. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And much of it is the proactive call I've put on our law enforcement officers, and the intention of that proactive approach to policing, if you remember, sir, from my presentation last year, is to ensure that our crime levels are kept low and our sites remain as safe as possible as we see the crime levels in surrounding communities continuing to creep up. So I'm asking the officers to do more. Now, we went down the officer and then Ty retired. Unfortunately, with the call volumes continuing to increase, we can't continue to decrease the staff. We already did decrease the staff. It's not prudent of me to recommend another level of decrease. I'm not asking for an additional staff member. I'm asking for a restructuring. And instead of having 3 sergeants to go down to 2 sergeants, allowing that additional sergeant's position, which we hold right now, which you know is at a higher salary level, allowing that position to be restructured to a patrol officer's position, which is a lower paid position. That's going to accomplish 2 things. The first thing that it's going to do is it's going to save the district money by employing a person in a patrol officer's position rather than a supervisory position. That's a savings of a substantial amount. And in the report that I prepared, I don't know if you have that in front of you, that was based on span of control recommendations. Span of control are the number of subordinates or direct reports, in this case, police officers, that fall under the position of a supervisor. And generally, the average is around 5 to 7. And that is recommended. It's recommended actually like, you know, maybe 6 to 10 industry wide, but you must understand that agencies that are compressed and working in a small space can control more officers per supervisor. Because we're so spread out, we need a little bit more oversight just because of the moving pieces. But in addition, what it allows is it allows, instead of the sergeants to be sergeants who are also doing all of this patrol work, by hiring on another patrol officer, which is not a new position, it's the vacated position. I'm just asking to bring a person in at a lower salary grade to save the district money. We're going to allow the patrol officers to focus on patrol responsibilities, and we're going to allow sergeants to focus on supervisory responsibilities. And the reason that we can go from 3 officers or 3 sergeants to 2 sergeants, which is a decrease, is because we have leveraged technology and seen all of these efficiencies through moving to the take-home vehicle fleet and through leveraging the technology that we invested in.
okay.
Did that answer your question? Is there anything else, sir?
No, that's fine.
Anyone else? Okay, do we have any other questions on personnel at this point in time? Any changes as far as the level that that we're gonna put for each position? If not, then I think Andy, we're good to move on, or Elizabeth, whoever is picking it up from here.
So I think to go back one, Andy, when you were talking and before we go forward is the seasonals, and the other, not
Oh.
only is the Department of Labor with the hourly rate increasing, but this past year due to COVID, I just want to underscore too, we went without seasonals and we made ourselves, we got by. And so the budget is proposing that we bring those seasonals back next year. They're really important for our sites and fleet team. And I think we've seen in the district, our sites have been busier more than ever, and they're going to continue that way. We've got new individuals in the community that have found us, and we expect that to stay. So that's really important. So
I totally support seasonals I totally support that.
If the minimum wage is increased to $15, will they fall under that?
Yes, eventually. It doesn't hit that until January of 25.
Well,
So basically every.
I think there is some talk with the new administration of moving that up faster, but accelerating that, but I guess we'll see.
Well, obviously we'll have to comply if they do. For this budget cycle, we raise that, wage $12 an hour because that's what's going to hit January 22. But we directed the managers ahead to absorb that cost increase in their budget. So you don't see a big dollar figure here. It would be about $20,000 if you just took the same hours and grew them by that new minimum wage. But it came up to a few $100s, again, because they had to absorb it. So it didn't really have any net cost. But you have less boots on the ground, less hours in the field, obviously, from that. Again, just to follow up, so we're trying to show how that 2% wage increase becomes a 3.1% annual cost increase. So between the 4.7 at that 0.3 and this additional cost of the agricultural service coordinator going full time as the ecologist, that's a 0.5%. So you're at basically 0.9% right there. That takes you almost to 3%. Again, no real substantial cost with that seasonal hourly change. One other comment too is we did have this position, this full-time agriculture ecologist in the July budget presentations that we did. And there's a narrative in there too that explains that. So as we look at the police, a couple things. We didn't, in the July presentation, I just took their existing matrix, which expired through March 31st of this year. They're out of contract. So as you know, we're negotiating now. I took that existing matrix and rolled it forward for the July presentation for the 22 budget going forward. Now what I've done is I put in there the cost related to just a couple of the matrices that we've looked at and shared with you. So those costs have been adjusted. And we just talked about the shift with the sergeants and officers. So they're not wage savings. It doesn't include any of the costs because we're just trying to reconcile how the wages get to 3.1. There's a net wage savings of this restructuring of 15 grand all in. But there's additional costs, obviously, with this new matrix. So collectively, the cost of this new matrix, less this wage savings, it represents about a $24,000 increase. Again, they haven't agreed to it. They haven't even seen it. So we're hopeful that this type of cost will get a contract with them, but there's no assurity of that, obviously. But that represents collectively another 0.5%. So you go 2.9 plus a half, you're at 3.4. And then there's a whole other slew of little things that we get you back down to that 3.1, and I'll spare you all of that explanation. Questions, comments? And then looking at how personnel as a percentage of the total general fund operating budget has changed over time. You can see as we go back to 13, it was only 71, 70%, and now it's slowly grown to 78%. And it's not because there's been, substantial annual increases in the cost of personnel of the district. In fact, if you do the math over those last 7 years, it's averaged just a little over 2%. That's total personnel costs. So I include any new employees, it includes insurance that was growing by double digits, as often as not. So again, pretty effective, we're able to do that. The other thing that's really driving it is the fact that The other operating, the things that are not personnel, is not growing. In fact, those are flat or falling. So you're taking this fraction ratio with the personnel on top and then the denominator in the bottom, and the denominator is getting smaller, you know, while the numerator is growing. And that's why you see as a percentage of the whole growing a lot bigger. If you remember in July, I showed you what Lake County Forest Preserve and DuPage County Forest Preserve, how they break out. They were both at right around 75%, and it didn't include their Social Security or their IMRF costs. So when you add those in, it easily takes them closer to 80%, if not a little bit over. So it's really still in the ballpark, or we're, you know, a little bit less than other open space agencies. Looking at the other operating expenses, then again, this year started like every other year, as long as I can remember, and that's the directive to the managers of your budget is zero, basically. You cannot exceed what you had last year. All your line items are zeroed out. You need to rebuild your budget from scratch, and that's the starting basis, and that's what the directors then review. So as you can see, collectively, they've absorbed 22% of inflationary costs over time. Education and training, you can look back to 14, and if you go back beyond that, we're, you know, near $80,000 in the budget. As revenues were reduced, we've cut that way down. Now we've been trying to work that back up. Obviously, education and training is imperative to the district, so gradually that's moving back forward. You can see, you know, this year a lot of that training hasn't taken place because of COVID. There's some remote opportunities. Those opportunities are obviously usually much more cost effective. So we haven't hit the budget. Let's see.
And if I can jump on that, and that's one of the things too with our succession planning and ensuring that we've got a talented team to continue on with the new developments that are really a push to develop that, and that's part of our strategic plan. So again, that increase is to ensure that we've got team members out getting the necessary training that they need to advance professionally.
I'm stuck here a little bit. Give me a minute. Hopefully I don't have to close it out. I have to restart it every 1 minute.
So is now a time for a joke or something?
Go ahead, Dave.
It's clean.
The only ones I know I hear as I drop my first grader off and they announce jokes on the PA system outside of the school. You know, they're kind of at a first grade level, so you probably wouldn't find them too funny.
Oh,
We might not even understand them.
Well, the last one I heard was, what do you call meat that's fallen on the ground?
I give up.
Ground beef.
Oh,
ha,
very
ha,
good.
ha.
You guys, can you see this now?
Can see your name.
Oh, you don't see a, oh wait, you know what, I need to, hold on.
Nope, cannot see anything yet.
I got one more step.
John, you're bright center.
What's that?
This is, oh, now you're gone. You were right there. There we go.
You're back up, Andy.
Yeah, I apologize for that. Every time I use that little laser pointer, it locks up, so I'm gonna stay away from it now.
So use your finger.
Yeah. Let's see if I can catch up to where we are. That. Then just overtime expense. You can see in this one, the actual is the orange bar. So we typically exceed the budget, but those are usually more than offset by vacancies during the year. And again, 21 would be the exception. I think as we go into COVID toward the end of the year, that kind of slowed things down for us a little bit. Budget's pretty flat from 21 to 22, 58,000 to 58,000. As we look at then all the other operating expenditures that make up 21% of the budget. So, you know, when I say, if you want to know what this budget's going to look like, you can go back and look at the 21 current budget. 77% of the budget's personnel, unless we're talking about a change, and we only have the 2 in there right now. You know, it's going to look just like last year. And so what we're left with is this $2 million, which is the non-personnel, non-capital. In 21, we have 2,051,000. It's going up just 2% or 40,000 for the year. What is that made up of? So what I did is this basically is the 300 lines in the middle of the document that we gave you, where it shows all the detail for the departments. You know, if you skip the first 7 lines, which is personnel, all the rest of it are these other operating expenditures, contractuals and commodities, as we call them. And what they include, most of it really isn't under the management of managers. It's non-discretionary, so to speak. And this is a portion of what would be included in there. So property taxes, waste disposal, utilities, fuel, legal, audit. You know, none of these things does a manager really have control over. And collectively, these are the numbers. If you go back and pull them all from the individual departments, it's $720,000. Additionally, within there are these maintenance items. And this is largely driven from the sites and fleets and facilities maintenance budgets. So these are the maintenance for buildings, equipment, roads and bridges, sites and trails, and vehicles. Again, there's no capital in this. These are the dollars being spent every year to take care of the 25,000 plus acres, all the buildings. Generally, you know, the projects will change, but the dollars, you know, are staying pretty consistent from year to year because it's a frozen budget. There's not a lot to work with. So in the 22 budget, this makes up $532,000 of that total $2 million. So collectively, that's 1.2 million, or 40% of that, or I'm sorry, 60% of that 1.2 of the total 2 million other operating, just from these 2 sources. Then the other one, if I go back and you look at things that are specific to areas of operations, for example, under Wildlife Resource Center, animal care makes up $13,500. That's largely the food for the animals. If we're going to care for them, it's got to be there. So again, year to year, this isn't going to change much. Educational programs, that's what it takes to put on their programs. Again, non-personnel, non-capital. Natural restorations, the bulk of this, herbicides and seeding, makes up probably 90+% of it. The farm lease expense to maintain the properties that are there, as well as do the soil testing. Communications and promo, a lot of this landscapes and the other promotional things we do. Again, there's really not a lot of discretion within this. If they're going to do the services that in 21, they're going to need these dollars to roll forward and to do the same services and operations in 22. They make up $485,000. So you add all 3 of those that we just looked at together, that's a total of 1.7 million, or makes up 80% of that $2 million. So collectively, this 1.7 and the personnel, that's 96% of your total general fund budget. It's pretty fixed as long as, you know, we're carrying out the same services, same level of operations going into the year to year. Then looking at that over time. So the blue line is what we've budgeted for those other operating expenses, going back from 13 through 22. And you can see that it's decreased over time. The green bar shows you what would happen if we just increase that by the CPI rate of inflation each of those years. So again, if we had grown that from 13 to fiscal year 22, that green bar grows by almost $400,000. And the budget and the actual actually falls by, you know, $300,000. So there's a $700,000 difference. And that's when we tell those direct managers, your budgets are frozen, figure out how to deal with the inflationary cost increase. And that represents the savings over time. But again, you know, eventually, as creative as we are, it gets tighter and tighter to do each year. The capital outlays in the general fund. So funded from revenue in the 20 budget, obviously we had a PTELL levy increase, so we were able to afford $314,000 of capital from revenue. Oops, I'm sorry, that's the 20 budget. And then in 21, we showed $93,000, that's this current year. we did have to reduce the levy. And then as we knew, we wouldn't be able to support any capital from revenue in this 22 budget. So then we look at what capital refunding from reserves. So again, in 20, we had 42,000 in reappropriations, 80,000 in new requests. And then again, with reduced revenue in 21 and reduced levy, that capital shifted largely down here to be funded from reserves. And now in this 22 budget, we have $90,000 of reappropriation. That's the 3 vehicles that were budgeted for this year. They may still come in this year, but we want to make sure that we appropriate for them again, or we have to go through the budget amendment process. So for now, they will stay on. And then new request you see is $449,000 of new capital requests this year, all will be pulled from reserves, which then for 22 is a total capital reserve funding of $539,000. If you compare total capital from 22 to 21, then it grows by $139,000 year to year. And then in the packet, obviously, we've presented the detail of all the capital items. There were $716,000 of capital requests for the general fund operating budget. This budget's included $539,000. So in the packet, we showed you the estimated cost, and those things were on the far right where it shows a 0 or just a dash. Again, they weren't approved in this budget. We've suspended those into for consideration into a future year, unless we've explained otherwise in the narrative.
And Andy?
Yes.
Can we pick on that electric generator? Is that a replacement or is that a new item?
So I'll say something quick and I'll let John respond because that was one of my next notes to talk about. They put that in as a placeholder. Jack can explain the need, but when they started to get some harder numbers, they're probably at least double that, if not more. So it's very likely we're going to take that out. But John, let me kick it to you and you can kind of tell them what it's about.
The district has one generator that powers Brookdale. That's where initially our central server system was. And that was actually in response to, it must have been 15 years ago or 10 years ago, we had a 4-day power outage or something like that. And it pretty much shut us down because that's where our computer systems were and whatnot. So we put one in there. And then this summer and fall, we kind of extrapolated based on, because Lost Valley Visitor Center does not have one. And there are lots of very, very expensive water-based cooling systems that are in that, cooling and heating systems that are in that facility. And Chris Zanko, facilities maintenance manager, said to me, he said that's probably his biggest concern at McHenry County Conservation District in terms of its buildings or facilities. So I said, well, let's put a number in there and see if we can go out and get cost estimates. And the cost estimates we got were significantly higher than 90,000. We won't get a generator to be at Lost Valley Visitor Center for $90,000. So we'll either remove it or try to find another way. But I'm not sure that we can afford it with what, given all the constraints that we have. Worries the heck out of me. We did have a power outage at Brookdale the other night, about a week ago. I think we were out for about 12 hours. And if we have something like that at Lost Valley Visitor Center, when it's, negative 15, we could be in some serious trouble over there.
So John, did the generator kick on at Brookdale when you were out?
Yeah, it comes on instantaneously. And the reason I know it was 12 hours is because it sends me a text and I think Chris gets the text. I think Perry gets the text as well. It went out at 4 p.m. When that storm went through and came back on at 4 a.m. Because that's what woke me up.
Wow. Well, maybe it's something that sounds like it's something we ought to do. If so much relies on it, it's kind of scary. I can see your point.
I believe we're looking at several $100,000.
Oh, geez.
Chris, you want to weigh in on that? I know you were the one doing the research on it.
Yeah, my biggest concern is, so if we were to get freezing temperatures and we were to lose power, even though it's a couple $100,000, if we were to lose the pipe work that were to go through LVBC for the boiler or for the geothermal, we would be way more than that once we start ripping walls open, repiping, replacing pumps, replacing boilers. I estimate, if we were at a polar vortex, which seems to be a new norm, I think that about 12 hours, if without power, we'd be in big trouble. The only other way we could do it is rent generators, which if we have power outages, in a large area, we may not get. It is my biggest concern in the district. It's a scary wild card. We've made it 10 years without it. We have had some frozen pipes in the past before my time, but we think we've remedied those problems. But if it does happen, it could be very damaging. Freezing pipes, once it starts, it's really hard to stop it.
Yep.
Do we have automatic shutoffs on the water there? So if there is a pipe burst that shuts the water down so that it doesn't, well, I guess if the power's out, it's run off a well, I assume.
Yeah, if the power's out, the water's off. However, the boiler's still full, the geothermal's still full. Actually, the situation would be even worse because it'd be hard to drain all that because you're still draining off only high points. You wouldn't be able to drain the entire system. You could try, but you got to also look that most of that building's heated by boilers. And if we were out 12 hours and those pipes got cold, now you're looking at how long is it going to take that boiler to reheat everything back up, and thaw out pipes, and what they call a hot shot, which is a machine that you bring in to thaw out pipes. I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention so they're aware that it is a problem.
I got a question. It's Pat. Is that geothermal, is that closed loop? Is it that closed? I mean, it's the water's always, it doesn't go into the ground or nothing.
Yes, and it does have a glycol in it. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to freeze. It's a misconception because the only way it won't freeze is moving. So if we don't have power, then we don't have pumps. It's not like we can just get a little small generator to operate those pumps. We're talking about 3-phase pumps that are big. There's 2 of them. And, if one of those pumps freeze, you're looking at a lot of money there too. I think one of those pumps is about $10,000. So
you're saying that there's antifreeze in the pipes?
Yes.
So, so obviously you're thinking it's going to freeze.
Well, if we have a power outage, you're going to freeze. Now, the geothermal is not necessarily the same as the boiler. So the boiler does not have glycol in there. The geothermal does, but you got to remember, geothermal operates in the 30 degree range. It's operating off of ground temperature at the time. So, that's a different animal. But if we start bursting boilers, the last thing that bursted was sprinkler lines. And that was a big problem. I think that totaled up to about $30,000 in damage, if I'm not mistaken. John would have that figure better than I would, but.
How did the insurance handle that?
I think Dermot paid it.
Dermot covered it, but again, on that one, from the new addition, well, it wasn't a new addition, but the retrofit that they did, there was a gap, as you recall, that was letting a lot of cool air in. And so that has been sealed very well, but that had a second. So we had a burst twice. So, third time, if it was through the same way, they'd probably, if we didn't fix what we needed to, they're still going to cover it, but if we didn't make the necessary corrections.
So have we made the corrections that they felt needed to be done?
Yes.
Yeah, we've done more than that. We've also, we found a pump that wasn't in place that should have been in place from design that we've now installed. So that is definitely helping the situation.
What do most government buildings do? Schools, city halls, on down the line. Do they all have generators?
Every building I've ever managed has had a standby generator that's got a boiler. I mean, that's typical.
Can I ask a question? And this is way out of my league. Are we talking about a natural gas type generator, which I installed here at home 4 years ago when we lost power for 5 days and everything in the freezer was lost and we had a lot of problems with our well and whatnot? Or are we talking about some type of commercial diesel generator as a standby machine? And is there a difference between one and the other? And I mean, this seems like a very important question, and technology continues to change. Who knows where we're going to be with battery storage, down the future that might provide some potential electric power backup. So I'm not posing as any type of bank of knowledge here, but maybe you can answer the question about the diesel versus natural gas. And I certainly think if we can't afford it now, we should keep an eye on it to see if there is some technological advance that helps us at least cover, the most critical part of the system.
Sure. It would most likely be a diesel generator. That would be my recommendation. Only because if we were in a crisis situation, like a national crisis situation, we may not have natural gas. So typically in I'm going to go all the way back to Y2K, we put in diesel generators so that we didn't have to rely on the delivery of natural gas. Can we put natural gas in? Sure, we can. We can. We can get prices both ways. I guess it depends on how critical we want to get.
But you don't have a gas line coming to Lost Valley. I mean, you would have to have some type of tank with natural gas in it.
It would actually have to be propane.
Oh, okay, fine, thanks.
The one at Brookdale is natural gas, and that's because there's a natural gas pipeline right on 14. So we were able to tap right into that. So in the Lost Valley Visitor Center area in Glacial Park, we're probably looking at diesel.
Okay. I have a question. How big of a generator, as far as KW, do you really think you need then?
Well, here's the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the power isn't from one source. It comes in from one source, but then it splits off in the building. The way the building was built, it was in phases and additions and stuff. And so the power isn't all in one space. So the original plan was to try to come back and hook up power, a generator to the main coming in. So in other words, hooking up in what they would call a current transformer, which is where ComEd brings in the power. So we would try to put a generator there, and it would be a rather large generator. I think it was 115 kW, if I'm not mistaken. But there's other ways we could do it, but then you're going to do multiple generators because unfortunately all the pumps and all the stuff that goes with the boilers isn't all in one place. So you either got a choice of repiping the building or going the easy route and putting a generator in, right at the transformer, which would be in the CT cabinet, which would be where ComEd brings in the power.
It sounds like this has some level of importance to the board that we explore this a little further. I know when Chris went out and got quotes on it, he recognized that the person did not quote it the way he was looking to do it, kind of how he had envisioned it. And he thought it probably jacked the price up significantly beyond that, certainly 90,000. I'm not blowing smoke when I say it's going to be several $100,000, because I think that's just going to be what it takes. If you want, we'll go back out, see if we can find a little more harder, better number, and certainly, present it as a concept that we could wrap in.
I got another question, Ms. Pat. All right, so we got a generator for our farm. Okay, it's not a backup, but it's tractor driven. So, I mean, you size a generator, so just all you need is critical things. You don't need a generator for your whole service unless you're gonna, you know, run the whole building and everything else. I guess my question is you would size a generator just to keep your thing from freezing up, and that's all you need. That's, I don't know, I could be wrong, but just because Commonwealth Edison has, you know, a huge service in there, you don't need a generator to duplicate what they're bringing in.
Correct. However, the power, so there's a pump that's on service A, I'll call it, and there's pumps and the boiler might be on service B. So how do you can't cross over those, the services are separated. So it's separated by east and west, I believe. And so it would be very hard to separate all that out and create a transfer switch that's just going to transfer certain parts of the power. So that's why, I mean, there's the other thing that we could do is bring like an electrical engineer or an electrical company in and pay them to come up with a ultimate plan, or an architect come up with an ultimate plan. We could do that. I went to Steiner Power, which is a generator company, and also electrical supply house, and had them come up with a plan. So I mean, it certainly can be revisited and looked at, you know, a bunch of different ways. We may be able, it may be cheaper to put 2 small generators in, one on that one side and one on the other side. And then, like you said, we selectively pick what we want to keep, primarily, i.e. the heat. That's my biggest concern, is keeping the building warm. We can be without lights as long as we don't have.
No, and I think, Pat, you're exactly, I think, you know, the power outage, how long, you know, we're not running something that, a hospital as an example, that we must have, that it's critical, absolutely essential, that everything has to be up at full force. So, you know, the alternatives and solutions, trying to find and we had a discussion at the staffing level too. I mean, we've gone all these years, we haven't had an issue, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be proactive. And, you know, looking at, could you rent in an emergency? But if everybody's out, and if it is that polar vortex type situation that's causing the freezes, and that's generally what we've seen, or if it gets towards more of the brownouts or other things that we get as things get with the climate a little bit hotter, it's hard. Then we do have, I guess I'm more concerned with the freezing with the pipes and those issues of the geothermal than not having, you know, air conditioning or whatever that's not operating the way it needs to during the summer months. So it really is that time period. And if we're having that locally in Northeast Illinois, then everybody else is likely having it too. And renting is a problem. So
yeah, we're probably looking at maybe 60 to 80 days out of the year that we're really at risk of freezing.
Right.
You know, January and February is about it. So yeah, I guess they can follow up on it, but I sure think that's an awful lot of money to try to keep a building warm for you know, 2 months, an opportunity of 2 months having something go wrong.
This is Chris. I'd like to say something. We use portable generators. I work for the North Shore Sanitary District, and they maintain quite a few wastewater treatment plants along the North Shore. And we have one basically large portable generator that can be gone from site to site to site, and they're diesel operated. But I think those are a lot less expensive than a stationary gen that possibly wouldn't be of use to any place else. So just, we need to know what size we need to make it. And, you know, they're not as expensive as that, you know, unless you go with a stationary one, from what I've experienced.
Right, we'd still have to pipe in to accept that portable generator, so we'd have to put ports on the outside of the building, which is not a big deal. But that is an option too, and then we could use that at other buildings as well, or other situations as well. So that's another option. There's a bunch of different options. My big thing and it is exactly like Andy said, is to put a place card to make everybody aware that this situation, this problem's here. That was my biggest thing. I just wanted everybody to be aware.
And I think you accomplished that.
You got our attention.
Can I recommend, are we then agreeing that staff needs to come back with some kind of you know, and getting what Chris is talking about, whether it's a portable, you know, what, and if you do that, what would that entail? What kind of modifications would that require? What are the costs? I understand it's a short period of time during the year. But if something does go wrong, it's very expensive. I think there's only so many times you can go back to Boardroom before they say you need to, you know, that there's certain types of risks that you've got to prepare for. And so I would want to make sure that if this is a risk that we've taken it seriously and we look at the different options and we can talk about it.
I would think I'd like to hear some more options.
Yeah, I'd like to hear some more options, what they cost and what we're looking at.
Sounds like we have a consensus there for some follow-up.
I will work on that.
Hey, Chris, thank you.
Great discussion. Thank you.
And John, point of order, I've got a bunch of little questions, so I'm beginning to think that when the budget gets a little farther, we need to have just a meeting just for budget, because I've got a lot of questions, and we just spent, what, 20 minutes on one individual budget item, so that's where I'm thinking.
Yeah, as I prepared for tonight and looked over everything, I'm thinking we'll be really fortunate to get through all of this in regular meetings. So I'm sure we're going to need at least one finance committee meeting.
Thank you.
Possibly. Okay, let's continue on with where we're at tonight. So are there more questions on the capital expenditures?
Well, I do have one. I noticed in there is a capital outlay for a PST-Crystal Lake tunnel repairs. That's a touchy subject. What is that?
So I refer to John or Amy.
Yeah, I can cover the tunnel down there is showing some it needs some repair, it needs some maintenance.
Under Route 14?
Yes, it is. It's under Route 14.
Isn't that
Yes.
the cities?
Yeah, I think technically it's the cities. But again, I think Chris said it pretty well. I'm simply bringing this up that this needs to be done. And so if they're not going to do it, we have to. Somebody has to.
No, John, we do not have to. Till somebody proves that it's ours, the minute you start doing something to it, it will all become ours. And
your point's well taken. And you know what? You're right. We don't have to do it, but you're correct. We do not have to do it. But it is beginning. It's beginning to fail. It's like a fence or something like that. So
then somebody has to work something out there. But the minute we start doing something there, it's the same as admitting that it's ours, and then it opens up to a whole lot more money than this.
Well, does that get to what you're talking about? So it's the 15,000 talking about the actual path itself. What is the 15,000 talking about?
Well, that's a good point.
You're not talking about the road. You're not talking about the tunnel. Are you talking about the path?
no, it's a section. It's beginning to erode. The tunnel, it's beginning to erode in a few spots. The concrete is basically water is coming down through.
Okay. All right.
This is Linda. I remember having this conversation at some sort of conversation about this previously, that we were opposed to doing anything because it was the cities. So now I see it on here, which gives me a little bit of pause. And then right below it, there's another 15,000 replace asphalt intersection behind Jewel. So in this,
the surface, and Amy's on, she can speak to it. The actual trail overlay, the surface that goes under, we are responsible for that. I mean, so it's the overpass, the underpass, the paraparts, and the structure, right? And for trustees that may not be as familiar with the saga, it's gone on for quite some time, but there's a lot of in your board packet folder if you ever want to, there's just lots of material to read through. But the IDOT manages the tunnel that actually goes underneath the road. So if they have to check it regularly, if that was failing, they have a responsibility to take care of that. There are the approaching walls, and then there's a railing. And you can see as you go under, not only it aesthetically looks poorly, you know, and so there was some work with graffiti removal, painting, and just the seeping that was coming through the hydrology. And Amy can probably speak to it more because she's been out there and viewing that, but it is going to continue to crumble. And so at some point, if it becomes unsafe, then we will need to, and it's not there now, we would then end terminus, our trail, we would not take care of, and we would just stop it and nobody would get through that section, right? That's how we would, if it doesn't get resolved, we would just have to close it.
Well, and I do think we need to have that conversation. I do know that as a group, the last time we had a discussion about this, I think it was back in 2017 or 2018, when we tried to give a proposal to the city where we were trying to come up with some kind of, you know, who was to do what. I don't recall, Linda, offhand, but I could be wrong, that we had another discussion since then.
We have, I remember it saying that it's the city's responsibility and not our responsibility, and that we,
Well,
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly, so.
the city's never responded to it.
I was just trying to clarify when that was,
Right.
since I didn't remember. So I remember very clearly what we tried to offer. I don't remember the second one, and I was wondering when that was. Thank you.
Well, it had to be, I don't know if we ever contacted the city, but I know we discussed it that we should and figure out who's going to fix this problem, because we certainly were not. But again, I'd have to go back and look at, I can't remember, but it has to be within the 1.5 years I've been on the board.
Right,
Like
we
the-
have not, it was left open when the whole process, and I'd go back to the date, we did have a discussion. I think the time it was, you know, because we had sent off a communication, the city didn't accept, and this is going way back when, and it was just left open-ended. They didn't respond. And so we just, you know, left it alone and moved on. And so we weren't going to take care of it, and we weren't going to pursue doing any sharing of anything. So it was my understanding there were some other parts that this was part of something that we do have a current responsibility for. And I guess I would like for John and Amy, if you could share, what are we currently responsible for? What are we taking care of down there underneath the tunnel?
The understanding I have is that we own or take care of the treadway, which is where the trail surface is basically the asphalt area. And that the district has never taken care of anything on the tunnel itself. Never had any responsibility for taking care of the tunnel itself. That's, you know, just whatever handshake deal occurred 20 years ago. And I think that's what Elizabeth was trying to untie years ago and trying to figure out what that was all about. So it's never been codified. And it's sort of like what Chris said a minute ago. I'm bringing it to the board's attention that there are some issues with that trail. If it's decided not to fix it, then we decide not to fix it. And but it is something that at some point in time needs some maintenance.
You sure brought that to our attention, John. Again, so you're talking about the path that we actually ride and walk on with that $15,000 under the tunnel.
I do believe there are
Can
two
I jump in?
components. Yes, go ahead, Amy, please.
I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties here, so bear with me. But the easy answer is the section of asphalt that's the intersection behind Jewel. That's just asphalt. That's just the blacktop, and it's a connection. And so it's nothing to do with Crystal Lake or with the tunnel. So that's separate. And that's, like John was alluding to, is definitely the district's responsibility. The Crystal Lake tunnel repairs, like you've all been talking about, it's who makes the first step. At some point, we have to take care of it. And so these little pieces are not what was looked at and being discussed as the larger picture of what's going on. these are the small cracks, like described as a basement, that's getting a little bit of water and some cracks. So you want to seal those up just to hold it. But you're right, there has never been any definitive who owns what. That does continue, but as my responsibility and as Perry's responsibility for maintaining it, it is affecting then the asphalt trail of it. And so we have to bring it up, and how do we bring it up to have to restart the conversation? I think has always been now, like John Henning said, Crystal Lake never responded. So these are the smaller things that we can do to prolong the life of our trail while we continue to work out the who's responsible and that sort of thing. So we needed to bring it to your attention. And we think we can do some small repairs, like I said, to these cracks that it's crumbling onto our asphalt. And so we're sweeping it off and taking care of it.
So it's not the path, it's not the floor part of the path itself, it's the wall that's crumbling and falling onto our path. Is that what I'm understanding?
Correct. Yes.
At some point, let me make a comment.
Go ahead, Bill.
Okay. So it sounds like a legal question or a legal issue. And it sounds like at some point, Elizabeth, we should get our Andrew, our counsel, involved and develop a strategy, to deal with the city fathers in Crystal Lake, if that's the agency or the county department or the state department or whichever governmental agency we think is responsible, for the tunnel above our path. And the threat is that we're going to close the path if we begin to think it's unsafe. And that will probably generate some public outcry, and they'll, get after all the parties involved to get their act together. But I think we can talk amongst ourselves and not make any progress. This is going to require a strategy to approach another governmental body and indicate that we're serious about this. And it probably won't be
Bill, you're absolutely right. And the history of this is we did have legal look at this with when Ansel Glink Tressler has not approached this, although they could look and read as one of their areas to look at all the history that's out there. But so there is an agreement. We had state legislators involved. We've had the IDOT meetings. We've had a lot of this historical piece. So I think the individuals, it's really where, if reasonable minds come together and can solve and work together to solve a problem, you can solve problems. If nobody wants to really solve it and one wants to push it 100% to the other, then
what you have to do is tell them we're going to close the trail as of such and such a date.
Right.
And then let the chips fall where they may. If they ignore you, you close the trail. Mm-hmm. And that'll generate some type of response.
Yes, I will.
Can I just say, I just want to add one more thing. I hear all of you, and I'm trying to just look at it from a maintenance and I think a lot of the conversation and the trouble is always about the solution and the cost of it. And I think in the past, it was huge. It was, oh my gosh, this tunnel is failing and it's terrible. And whose fault is that? What we're offering is that potentially it's moved and it's not going to move again. And there is no concern that it's going to fail or move again. And so I understand that that's, again, that was millions of dollars of a solution that everybody, was trying to figure out. And that was, again, I get it. I understand it. We should have an agreement and of who is supposed to do what. But from a pragmatic and just trying to solve a problem here, $15,000 potentially could solve this problem of just, really what's impacting users. We have an engineer out there that has said it is not moving any longer. We can continue to study it, but we went a different direction. So we're not coming at you with the same, we hear you. I want you to know that we hear you. We came at this with a different solution, and this solution was much smaller in what really needed to get done. What's the real risk, and can we afford it? So again, I understand, trying to figure out who, even $15,000, who pays for it, but it's a much smaller and I think definitely more efficient solution as opposed to this large thing. It's not failing. These are just cracks that we need to fill.
And so, go ahead.
Glad. I was just gonna say, I appreciate that, Amy, and that's a point well taken. I'm happy to hear that $15,000 should do it. I just worry that somewhere down the line there could be a bill for $250,000, and once you've fixed the 15,000, the city or whoever comes back and says, well, you've kind of admitted it's yours, and maybe legal will tell me differently. That maybe they'll say spending that $15,000 doesn't make you liable for anything else, but I sure don't want to spend $15,000 and find out it's gonna be $250,000 some other day.
And we will check that.
Totally agree. Absolutely.
We would check that with Tressler, and I do want to bring up, so I think with City of Crystal Lake, we know several things. There's been some changes. There continues to be changes. I did get notified earlier this week that City of Crystal Lake is asking for the district to support a letter, which is separate than the budget, but specific for a crossing that they've been wanting, a safe crossing on the Prairie Trail, which is a separate issue. So we need to have a conversation. City of Crystal Lake continues to come up, and so they're looking to find that, and they want our support to write a letter of support to assist in reaching out to IDOT for a safe crossing on 176.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think we need to sit down. I think some of the team members over at the city are the same, but I think if we're, not to string them together, but I think there's a conversation opportunity.
Well, it also sounds to me like there's some additional information that would be helpful for us that Amy's bringing up now. This idea that the tunnel is not shifting any further, that they continue to study it. It's a little bit different than what we were talking about, and that's kind of what I was getting back to before. We may have discussed it in the meantime about who's responsible, but the hardcore data that we were using was back in 2017, 2018, where we made our decision. We haven't had an update on that really until now when we're talking about this. So it's good news to hear that the thing is not shifting. We do need to have contact with the city and reestablish that relationship. And they're obviously looking for some support on some other items. So maybe this is an opportunity, Bill, like you say, to get the conversation going again, but maybe more collaboratively. And now that we have some additional information. So, maybe we could be moving forward in that way. I'm down here, I'm in Crystal Lake. I would be happy to help out in any way that I can. If we maybe established a small subcommittee to work with staff and liaison with the city to see what they're looking for in terms of this other project, and maybe, it's an opportunity.
Well, we also have new legal also, so we should have our new legal team, or at least look at this and see if they have any different opinion than what we've had in the past. I don't know that it shouldn't be any different, but they should at least be up to speed, which it sounds like they'll have to be at some point in time, and then we can go forward from there.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, but what council had said before is we did not have a legal, the way the agreement, there is no agreement because they signed off the agreement with the state when it was built. And so we have no legal document that says, as much as they want us to be, or whether we would have done an IGA at the time, which is how we would have done business today, is you would never have moved forward with another unit of government without having that agreement in place to begin.
And so that leaves the point, rather than go right to Tesler, can we look at the file for a document from Ansel and Glink rather than asking the same question to another attorney?
back the documents and see what we can find.
I think if I remember, it seemed like when we went through all those documents, we didn't come to anything very spelled out. It was not spelled out very well, at least from what I recall of it.
No, we had nothing to do with it.
Right.
Or the district at the time chose not to have anything to do with it.
Well,
Right.
it also sounds like there's different information available now. We are dealing with different individuals. We ourselves are a different board. They have changes, and it's all about working together and seeing where everybody's willing to come together on a common interest too.
Well, John, again, point of the meeting, maybe we should move on and then.
That's just what I was going to say, Dave, is we need to move on. We've got 24 minutes before the next meeting is supposed to start. And we're not anywhere near this one.
Right.
And I really would like to start the other one on time. So I'd ask Andy to move on, and we will have to have a finance committee meeting. And although much of this discussion has gotten off of finance, but we'll try to bring that all back together. But anyway, let's move on.
All right, just one correction to point out. Perry caught a kind of a typo today that I listed these vehicles. There's 6 vehicles in the budget. 3 of them are reappropriations. None of them are additions to the fleet. They're all replacements. And you can see the top 2 up there, it says addition. That's just carried over from last year. There were additions in the 21 budget. And again, they're reappropriated in 22. And then just looking at capital over time, this shows the amount of capital that was budgeted to be purchased from revenues from fiscal year 13 through 22. And you can see obviously in the years where it's down, it's driven by property taxes. So when we had the levy either decreased or frozen, in those years there's very little capital available, revenue available to support capital. And then the blue bar shows the amount of capital funded from reserves. And this brown bar shows the total capital in each of the budgets. And you'd see it generally trending downward from 13, where there's still some new development money and higher property tax levy increases to where we are now. We should be averaging really probably around $400,000 if we were going to be proactive and staying in front of everything. And then I was asked to look at the concept of how long would our reserves support us if we had multiple years of a frozen levy. So we've looked at that in pieces as we've done the projections with each budget cycle and levy cycle, and I forecasted forward. But I did a quick kind of analysis showing what that would look like. So it's very simple. I'm holding property taxes frozen for the next 5 years. That's the increase is the assumed percentage growth. So it's a 0%. I show the state property replacement tax growing by 2% a year. I think that'll start coming back around. The interest income holding is driven by everything else, and I'm using a moderate interest rate. I'm assuming by 23, the rates start coming back, but not strong. I think at the end of the 5 years, I'm showing Fed funds at 1%. I've frozen the farm leases over the 5 years, showing the program fees growing by 2%. Foundation reimbursements just driven by the wage and insurance and personnel assumptions because they're reimbursing that. Then for the assumptions, as I roll these expenses forward, I'm growing the wages and retirement by 2.5%, health insurance, all insurances by 3.5%, other operational contractuals and commodities by 2%. So this is the 22 budget, just as we looked at it. Right now we're projecting, if we accepted everything that was in there, a $935,000 draw from reserves, $338,000 of operating, $597,000 of capital. So as I take the 22 budget and take these basic assumptions and roll them forward over time, you can see so again, the key here is we're freezing that levy at that 7.6 million. And you roll down to the first year of 23, and you can see that operating deficit grows to 584. The other thing I did do is that I've reduced the capital to kind of like a bare minimum level. So we have 597 in here for this 22 budget, but there's years obviously we've had much less than that. So for 23, I held it at 250 and then grew that by 2% a year going forward. So you can see in 23 that deficit's 834. So operationally, it's obviously growing, but then I'm reducing the capital that more than offsets it. But now after that, everything's, expenses are growing, revenues not moving much because the taxes are frozen. And you can see that deficit would grow to 1.9 million by fiscal year 27. So that's just 5 years out. If you look at the reserves then, for this budget, we're assuming that we're going to end that fiscal year, begin the fiscal year with $6.1 million of reserves. And that's total reserves. That includes the amount that's been assigned to camp. We back out the $935,000 budgeted reserve spend, you're left with 5.2. And then I'm just reducing that by the projected operating deficit from the slide before. And really, it'll be very difficult for the district to operate with much less than, I would say, 2 months reserve, so 1.5 million in the bank. Right now, 2.4 represent 25%, which is $2.5 million. So as you get out to 25, 26, really 26 would be difficult to do. You know, it wouldn't work on paper. The other part we haven't included now is I'm starting with all the reserves, including what's assigned to camp. So now we have to look at the camp fund expenditures. So we're assuming starting 4/1 of 21, the beginning of this fiscal year 22 budget, we'll have 1.2 million in the camp. There's $694,000 net spend. So that's net of the grant revenue that we think's coming in. We'd end the year with 532. Then I'm holding the camp spend just flat at 500. I could have grown by 2%. Doesn't really neither here nor there. We held it flat each year at 500. So now you see the camp deficit, you know, hits 467 here, which means you're going to start borrowing from the general fund. And then obviously that grows each year by $500,000. So if I take, you know, the beginning total funds and subtract both the general fund deficit and this camp spend, assumed camp spend, and 500,000 is a pretty minimal amount. Again, it's, you know, probably half or 60% of what we'd like to do. Now you see, you know, by fiscal year 25, you're down under $1 million. You're well below 25%. Again, $1.5 million. If we don't have $1.5 million in the bank, liquidity is going to be much, much harder to manage. It'll be difficult as you're going from, you know, October through May of the next year, waiting for that first property tax levy receipt. But clearly by 24, you're in the red. All the reserves are gone. There's nothing for camp by 24. Levy year 24, fiscal year 26. So just 4 years out, you'd be done. Questions, comments? So basically, they'd last us about 3 years on paper. You could argue that, hey, maybe we'll have a $300,000 surplus each year. So multiply that times 4. You know, you add $1.2 million, you might squeeze another year out of it. You might make it out to 26, but it'd be really, really tight. You wouldn't make it to 27.
Right, and you had also your idea back in your revenue projections, you left the lease rents, everything was flat, correct?
Yeah, because you don't know what corn's going to do, and it's been around 4. I get some of the acreage will be coming off. That, you know, that would obviously expedite the reserve burn.
Right, so this was it again. I think this is a longer conversation, not necessarily one that would need for tonight, but just as requested to show, you know, if we were to hold flat to kind of get to that magical place to where the debt is 100% paid off, and if the perception is that we have much reserves to which to draw down on, there is no emergency you're taking away because we have limited ways to pay for those. The camp fund was created because of the increasing fund reserves at the end of the year by doing good budgeting and expending less, and that's what's fed the camp these years. So
I think that leads kind of into one of our of course, there's a discussion to be had amongst ourselves as to what we would like to do about all of this. And then there's also the discussion with officials, which you have here on the agenda, as to what their appetite is for us to, we have new officials in key positions as to how they feel that we can go forward. So I think all that ties together, and we need to have those conversations amongst ourselves and with those people in the next 2 months.
Absolutely.
All right, moving on to dedicated accounts, the capital fund. Again, this is really the fund that was set up for new capital initiatives. These are things that fall outside the general fund. largely grant supported. This year, there's really only one project in there we'll talk about. It's also where the land acquisition dollars are. So in the treasurer's report that you're approved in October for the month of October, there was $163,000 available for land acquisition. Similar to, basically the exact same thing we did in 21 and similar to what we've done in the last several years is we've also budgeted $750,000 of grants for land acquisition and $250,000 for donations. Again, they're not specifically identified. It gives the district the flexibility by identifying appropriating within the budget. If dollars should come forward, we have the opportunity to expend those and secure a land purchase if one showed itself in the next fiscal year. The only project that's in the dedicated accounts is this railroad crossing at Lane Road. The amount of the spend this year is just $25,000. That doesn't represent the whole project's at $210,000. 80% of that should be grant funded. But again, just for 22 in the dedicated accounts, the spend would be for engineering and permitting approximately $25,000. And then this just shows the dedicated account budget 21 to 22 in summary. Again, you see a total expense reduction of 337. Our current 21 budget has an LVBC exhibit in there for 400,000. That's going down to zero, obviously. So dedicated is pretty small. You see the land acquisition dollars staying largely about the same, $1.1 million dedicated for land acquisition. Again, 1 million of that's not identified. It's just there as a placeholder. Capital Asset Management Plan Fund. Again, this is for large capital items, typically over $5,000 with a estimated useful life of 10 years or more. We presented to you in August a 3-year camp update. And in that, we showed a total expected expenditure. And obviously, Amy enumerated and John and Perry, all the projects for the next 3 years. And within that first year, they showed $998,000 as a spend for the camp plan. That doesn't include the vehicles and large equipment. So it's just looking at sites and trails and the building demolitions. So in this budget, we're showing $945,000. That's a difference of $53,500. And this highlights then the differences. I'm not going to go through each project. They're enumerated in both the tentative budget packet that you have in front of you tonight, as well as what we presented in August. The roof replacement for Brookdale, that's still in the budget, but it's going into the general fund. It's coming out of the general fund budget. So again, it would be a difference between what we showed in that first year camp and tying it back to this camp fund budget. So we reduce it down by 115. The Living Land Farm, that 22,000 is still probably the total cost, but for 22, this fiscal year 22, it's only be about $10,000 of that would actually get expended this year. And then they picked up the demo for Rush Creek for the O'Garrick house of 25 grand. That wasn't in what we showed you in August. Then for the Glacial Park, again, that cost is still $71,000. That's what we showed in the camp plan. But only $30,000 of that will be spent out of the camp fund this year. So that's, again, a difference between what we're showing in that camp plan for the first year and the actual camp budget. Marengo Ridge flooding issues, that was reduced from $25,000 to $10,000, a difference of 15 grand. Let me catch up here. Marengo Ridge went up by 1,500. And then the Prairie Trail South, this is just a reappropriation. So it's not a new project. It's in the 21 budget approved by the board. The $63,000 is just probably not going to get done. So it's rolled forward into the 22 budget. Question? And then lastly, they added $40,000 for emergency repairs.
Andy, at one point when I looked at this, there was reference to roofing a barn at the McConnell Farmstead. Has that been taken out?
No, that's not changed. So this is just what's changed from the August presentation with all the detail and what we're showing in the camp fund.
Right. Well, maybe at our next meeting, we can talk about that McConnell Farm barn roofing project. I mean, my feeling is that we haven't really discussed those older farm buildings that we've acquired, and the question is what are we going to do with them, and should we spend $40,000 putting a roof on a building that we don't have a use for? So we can table that for now, but it's an issue that I'll look forward to speaking about.
Absolutely.
Okay, moving on. And then just showing a summary of the capital asset management plan fund budget 21 versus 22 comparison. Something that's new for the first time this year, if you look at that second line, we're showing grant revenue of $250,000. So in the past, it was the dedicated accounts that the grants would flow into. And largely the projects in the dedicated accounts were new initiatives. They weren't repair and replace of existing. But again, as resources are getting more limited, both financial and time, they've really had to shift and look for grants to support the repair and replacement of existing. So rather than moving dollars in, out of the camp back to the dedicated account back and forth, we're just going to go ahead and budget for the grant right in the camp fund where the dollars are going to be expended from. And then if you look down at the bottom, we show an increase on the total projects of by $388,000 over the prior fiscal year 21. Do we want to keep moving through these, Elizabeth? Or?
Well, we are under 10 minutes. We have 8 minutes left here. So President Henning, what is your preference? Do you want to move those other two topics? There's no action item. We can move them for discussion at the regular meeting and continue on this, or work on now and try to schedule another time to pick this back up. What's your preference?
I guess the outreach could be moved to the next meeting. I mean, you just put that under your topic, along with the same with the board self-evaluation. Those could both go under your topics, along with everything else that you got on executive. So we could spend the next few minutes with Andy, then we could adjourn and go to our other meeting, and then we will try to work through scheduling a finance meeting where we can delve into any of this further as needed. So let's let Andy go for a few minutes, and then we're going to adjourn this one and move on to the other one.
And I'm sure it'll be said as you guys are scheduling it, but obviously we're running into that deadline, to try and get this budget package into you in January for approval. So the sooner we can get the next finance schedule, the better.
Right.
Looking at the debt service fund, the district in 01 issued $68.5 million of GO bonds, and in 07, 73. Both of these issuances were referendum approved. The use of the bond proceeds was statutorily restricted to land acquisition, site and trail improvements, and the protection and restoration of natural habitats. In 2014, we refinanced all of the outstanding debt at that time, yielding a total savings to the taxpayers of $14.1 million over the remaining life of the bonds. As of March 31st, 21, so at the end of this fiscal year, there'll be $67.5 million in general obligation bonds outstanding, again, all referendum approved. And there'll be $2.3 million in debt certificates that we just closed on that'll be outstanding as well. This shows the debt retirement schedule. Again, the voter approved GO bonds, that's all a separate debt service tax levy. So the property taxes will come in, used just to pay the principal and interest on those bonds. You can see that in total that debt service grows about $300,000 a year. And then to service the new debt certificates at that net cost of 1.25%, I believe 1.26%, $35,000 of interest each year. Again, in 2026, that levy will go to zero. So we'll be going from a levy of over $14 million principal plus interest to zero. And that's where we see that 60% tax reduction. It gives us the opportunity to look at refinancing these $2.3 million outstanding and still have a net savings to the taxpayer of well over 50% of the total tax levy. And then just showing budget 21, budget 22 for the debt service. One thing you'll notice is the principal goes down quite a bit, 1.2 million. And that's because in the 21 budget, we included the $1.9 million pay down of the pitching loan as part of the principal. So that's gone. And so all you're looking at for 22 would just be the growth of the GO bond debt service payments for principal. We have not been collecting the full debt service levy. So that's has the same uncollectible of about 1/4%. And that's why you'll see a net deficit of $64,000 projected. When Fed funds was 2 and 2.5%, the interest on that $12 million would more than pay for the levy shortfall. That won't happen in 22. There's been several other years that it hasn't happened. There is over $200,000 of fund balance, so that'll take care of it for a few years. Under statute, we can go back and collect the debt service shortfall. We haven't done it in recent years because we've been so concerned about not growing the overall property tax levy. But at some point in the next year or two, that may be something we want to look at again. If we're holding other levies flat, is going back and collecting a shortfall from the debt service. And that shows up as an addition to your levy. So the way you collect it is you have your normal debt service levy for, we'll say, levy year 21. And on top of that growth, you'll add whatever you're going back and collecting from prior years that wasn't collected in full. Under the insurance fund, it's funded by a separate property tax levy. It's part of the PTELL aggregate. So again, that's limited to the PTELL increases. Though that property tax levy can only be used for risk management, loss control needs. It's the tort fund or tort liability levy, as they call it. And our insurance fund provides for the general liability insurance needs of the district. So not any employee insurances. This would be property, auto, workman's comp, those types of insurances. We are part, as we talked about, of the Park District Risk Management Agency. It's an intergovernmental risk pool. It not only provides the insurance, but it provides lots of proactive measures, training steps, audits to help the district run safely and have less risk to the pool. And ultimately, that's what PDERMA is trying to do, is minimize the risk and exposure. 90% of the expense in the 97% of the expense in the insurance fund is just the premiums to pay for that corporate general liability insurance. So here's the 21 budget versus 22. I'm holding the levies flat. PDERMA is projecting about a 4% overall. I guess it's 5% overall premium increase. A lot of that's driven by workman's compensation increases. It's not just the district's experience, but it's the experience of a whole pool that we all share together. Then you see the total growth year over year of about 5.8% in expenses. And we would expect then a decrease of the fund balance of $15,000. There's about $300,000 of fund balance in there. Those dollars can only be used for risk management, loss control. They can't be used for anything else. And again, if you look at that top highlighted line in yellow, 264,000, that's all the PDERMA premium. And that's 97% of the whole budget. So the debt service budgets, the insurance fund budget, there's really not much to look at there. I think that's all I got. Did I make it?
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Andy.
We stepped on a lot of your time, but we'll get back to you in another meeting, and we'll continue to work through this. And I know the time constraints, and we'll work as quickly as we can through each of these issues. So with that, we're going to move everything else that's on this agenda under Elizabeth's topics in the next meeting. So I would like a motion to adjourn this meeting. We'll take a roll call vote on that. And then we will I know somebody maybe has to get a drink or do something. So we'll start the next meeting as soon as we get everybody online.
I'll make the motion that we adjourn.
Thank you, Dave. And Linda seconds. Could I have a roll call vote, please?
Sorry, had to unmute.
Okay.
Trustee Fritz,
Yes.
Trustee Cook,
Yes.
Trustee Dom,
Yes.
Trustee Thomas,
Yes.
Trustee Campbell,
Yes.
Trustee Brandt,
Yes.
Trustee Henning.
Yes. We're adjourned, and we'll reconvene in the next meeting as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.